And we're back in Inside the Ropes, and this week we have a very special guest on the show. He is a man that has been, I can't quite believe it, but in professional wrestling for over 50 years. He has done it all. He's won championships, he's trained wrestlers, he's worked in magazines, he's commentated. He's pretty much done everything that there is to do, and now he's with us in Inside the Ropes. It is an absolute pleasure to welcome Les Thatcher. Les, welcome to the show.
Thank you very much, Kenny. A pleasure to be here, and it has been just over 53 years this past July the 4th.
Wow. I bet it doesn't feel like it.
Oh, sometimes. But, you know, that far back I would have never, I wasn't looking past the next year maybe, or the next couple of months, never mind, 53 years later, and think about still being in the same industry and doing something that I enjoy.
Yeah, it's an amazing feat. But when you were kind of breaking into pro wrestling back in the day, I guess at that point it was still a case of protecting the business, as they call it. And,
oh yeah.
So how did you encounter that? Because we had Nicola Roberts' baby doll on the show a few months ago, and she had mentioned that when she first went to like her dad's promotion, and she was sort of around, and she must have been about 15 at this point, that people kept saying the word kayfabe when she came in a room, and she thought it was a person because they kept saying the name. But when you started kind of getting into wrestling or training to become involved, what was that like for you when, in terms of wrestlers kind of protecting it and not letting you in straight away? What was your experience of that?
Well, you're right. They did protect the business. And, I'd been an athlete. I was in organized athletics of some kind from the time I was 7 years old, baseball, football, basketball, wrestling, things like that, drag racing as well. I drove race cars. I was an adrenaline junkie, I guess. But anyway, at age 19, I found a way. It was very difficult to get into business, and I had talked to several people and nothing. And then I saw a story on the Tony Santos promotion in Boston that was training young athletes that aspired to be professional wrestlers. So I sent them a letter, and they sent me back a brochure. And anyway, I decided to go there. So climbed on the Greyhound bus here in Cincinnati and went to Boston at age 19. And they proceeded the first week there to hand me my ass several times to let me know that, it was a tough grind. And truthfully, it wasn't such, in a way it was a shock, but then in another way, having been an athlete, you think, well, I'm in pretty good shape or this or that, and you're not prepared for this. So anyway, that's the way it started. And they actually, Kenny, did not smarten me up until the day of my first match. I started training in February of 1960, and my first match was July the 4th, 1960. And how they trained us without actually smartening us up. And I think with most of us, as we went along, we kind of started to figure things out, but you didn't say anything, right? Because then some old-timer is going to step up and prove you wrong. That was, they were certain to do that. So anyway, but they would tell us, well, now, we want you to learn the holds, the moves, the proper way to put them on. But don't apply pressure to one another because you guys aren't. It doesn't matter about here, because you guys, it's not about winning or losing. It's just you're going through the motions. So they actually were teaching us to work without teaching us to work, if that makes sense.
Yeah, it does. It does.
But like I say, I think and there was like maybe 1-2 other guys that I, we would kind of wonder, but not out loud. So anyway, July the 4th, I lived in a rooming house just across the street from the gym, and promoter Tony Santos sent his son over to get me, and at first I thought, oh my God, I'm in the doghouse. I've done something wrong. It's a holiday, and the boss needs to talk to me. So anyway, I go over, and he said, today is your day. Go home and get your gear together. And I said, well, I stood there with my mouth hanging open. He said, you're going to have your first match. Go get your stuff and come back. So anyway, I did that. And while we were waiting on other people to show up, he said, the way you guys have been training where you haven't applied pressure to one another. And I said, yes, sir. And he said, well, that's the way the matches will go today, but they'll explain this to you as you go. Now, we were doing it was a fairground celebration in Blue Hills, Maine, which was several hundred miles from Boston. And so there were going to be 3 matches, but only 4 wrestlers. So myself, a veteran by the name of Bull Montana, Cowboy Ronnie Hill, who did a lot of the fair take-on-all-comers thing, and the guy I had my first match with, and then a football player, not soccer football, but American football, from Boston University by the name of Joe Sasso. So it was in Joe's car, and the 4 of us rode together, and in that couple hundred miles, they again proceeded to smarten me up. And I wrestled twice that night. Ronnie Hill and I did the first match. The other 2 guys did the second match, and then we came back in a tag in the third match, and that was the way it started.
Well, I was going to ask you there because it just sort of popped into my mind, and I want to mention it now in case I forget. Do you think that there's sometimes sort of accusations lobbied at today's wrestlers that maybe they're not in it to be wrestlers, that they're more in it for the fame or the, getting on TV and stuff? Do you see a big difference nowadays? Because one of the things that I've sort of noticed, I hear about a lot through reading different things or listening to different, shows and stuff, is that, the fact that a lot of the wrestlers in WWE now, for example, have their own buses, and maybe they kind of do their own thing and stuff, and there's a lot of veterans who, when they're doing interviews, will say that most of their experience and the things that really helped them were the road trips that they had with the veterans who would talk about wrestling in the car. Do you think that those sort of...
Oh, absolutely. I believe that to be true. Yeah, the road... I mean, when you had the opportunity to ride with guys who had been around, and say been at the top, and you're on a 200-mile or a 400-mile round trip, let's say, with these guys. My God, yes, that's and especially if you've worked with them in a match or been their partner or they've seen your match and you're a captive audience, you better listen. But yeah, I think that's so important. And again, that's one of the things that's actually lacking. Unless the crazy thing is, you should never be happy. Never satisfied. I shouldn't say you shouldn't be happy. You should never be satisfied. I'm my own worst critic. When I used to do the camps with Harley Race and Ricky Steamboat, I would say to the groups, I don't know how many tens of thousands of matches between the 3 of us we've had. Mm-hmm. We have yet to have our best match, meaning that you're never satisfied.
Yeah.
And be your own worst critic. And it's amazing to me, Kenny, how I watch some of these kids and I'm thinking, do you realize, I don't know how you keep from realizing you're embarrassing yourself, And to me, that's the fear of embarrassing myself, I guess has given me a work ethic. I don't know, but I find that to be different now, Kenny. They work more for the pop, the immediate pop, than for the story out of the match and to take it further. In some sense, it's easier than actually learning psychology and to be able to put together a story and go out there and create it on the fly.
Yeah, no, that's a really good point. And I guess back when you were wrestling in the 60s, when I was sort of looking up at the different things that you did, it seems that a lot of your career was spent in different tag teams, wrestling for various different regional NWA tag team titles. Was it you that kind of made the decision that you wanted to be in sort of tag teams for the first few years, or was that something that was put upon you? How did that sort of come about?
And the funny thing is, Tommy Pritchard and I have had that conversation, because he was in the same boat, it became pretty much a tag team wrestler, and he said the same thing. He wasn't sure how it evolved either, so... But, the thing is, too, that I think a lot of guys, the younger guys, don't learn now, is to be when I say a role player, is to be versatile enough to be whatever a promotion needs of you. Probably the best example of that at a high level right now would be Chris Jericho. He can take a new guy and get that guy over without killing himself because he's that talented and, of course, that confident in his own talent. Or he can be a top guy. He can be a heel or he can be a babyface. He can work tags. So there's nothing that Chris can't do, and he does good promos, either heel or babyface. So there's really nothing that he can't do, which makes him that much more valuable to a promotion as well. And some guys always just aspire to be the top guy. And I had this conversation just recently with someone back in the territories. My work, in-ring work, spanned 1960 to 1980, 20 years. And there were guys who their job as a heel or a babyface was a mid-card guy. To, let's say, for example, Kenny, you come into the territory as a new babyface, and I'm a mid-card heel. You get over preliminary guys, and in a few weeks you'll work your way up. And you and I will set up to work some little program, meaning that we will work maybe 2 matches, maybe even as many as 3 together. But because I'm that mid-card heel, I'm supposed to be tougher to get by than those, first 3 or 4 preliminary matches that you had. So anyway, but my job is to get you over without killing myself and get you ready to move up to the top guys, the top heels. And yet I've got to stay fresh there too. So sometimes that mid-card heel or babyface was a better worker than the guys that he was moving by him. He had to, But he was a specialist. And, you take pride in that. It was just like I enjoyed in tag teams being the babyface in peril, being the guy selling and fighting for the corner and feeling that crowd come with you, as you worked them. And then finally giving your partner that hot tag. Obviously, the other end of the coin was good, too. But, it was just, again, I think taking pride in your work and just having, enjoying it and putting your heart and soul into it. That's, you can teach athleticism. You can make guys take good athletes. You can't teach heart. And it's got to come from there. It's got to come from your soul. I mean, it's got to be inside of you. You've got to really want it.
Speaking of what you're talking about, do you keep up with TNA at all?
Not as much as I did. I've sort of lost interest. And there's some good guys there and guys I know, but I just truthfully, my thought on TNA is, and I wish them well, and I wish there were 10 more like them. So which would give a lot more guys work and could make a decent living. But I think TNA is exactly where they're at today, where they'll be in 10 years from now if they're still around. I think they've cried wolf so many times. It's just they're, they are what they are. I don't see them getting better or maybe not even any worse. But it's the trouble is they're just WWE light. It's
well, that's what I was going to mention to you, because at the moment I don't know how much you're following. So if you know this already, stop me. But they're doing a storyline now with AJ Styles where he had it was kind of like a rehash of the CM Punk angle of 2011 with sort of him not being under contract and taking the belt. And I could go into mass amounts of detail, but it kind of goes back to what you were saying earlier, in that there's no believability there from anybody that this isn't just an angle, because everybody reads the internet now, everybody thinks they know everything, so everybody knows that he's under contract there and all that sort of stuff. And
sure,
I guess
it's like the Dixie Carter thing. She doesn't do a bad heel promo, but strike one is Stephanie McMahon's doing the same thing. So it doesn't, I don't care if Dixie thought this 3 years ago, now would have still been the wrong time to implement it, because it just looks like a bad copy regardless, and then the angle you just mentioned, the same thing, it's just...
Is there a way, do you think, for that? Because I was actually watching some TNA footage earlier today, and I was watching some of the stuff they did back in 2011, and they had so many guys that come in, Rob Van Dam, Jeff Hardy, Mr. Anderson, all these guys that had come in. It really seemed for a little while like they had enough sort of star power that they could really sort of be a good alternative. Not compete necessarily, but be a good alternative. But do you think there's evidence that they can do, or do you think that they have been WWE light for so long that it's just not going to matter anymore?
Well, I don't think it matters. And the other thing is, the network is obviously not that strong. I know there are people, that don't know that TNA exists. I mean, people who have, like I'll be in the gymnasium here. Up until a couple of years ago, I was doing some personal training as well. and people knew my wrestling background. A lot of times somebody would come up and talk to me what they'd seen on Raw or just talk about the wrestling business in general. Mm-hmm. And I would mention TNA, and they'd say, "What's that?" I say, "It's on Spike on Thursday." "Oh, really?" And I know Mick Foley makes a joke of when he was there, people would say to him, "Mick, why aren't you wrestling anymore?" Because they didn't know he was at TNA either. So, there's the thing, they're on network television, but, I couldn't even begin to tell you how many hundreds of channels I've got on my cable system and how many hundreds I don't bother to watch. If I weren't looking for wrestling, I may not find it, because there's really nothing on Spike that I'm really, engrossed in. Well, the Bellator once in a while. Other than that, I don't pay a lot of attention to Spike. So I think that's part of it. But I just, they don't have a big following on pay-per-view. Their ratings pretty much hold it, right there at that 1. And I just don't see it changing. I really don't. And I honestly, like I said earlier, I wish it would. I wish there were 10 more companies like it. Where guys, and we're, of course, now, we're talking about territories you can't switch now because of contracts. And years ago, we didn't have contracts.
But were you able to, when you were under the WWF sort of umbrella with developmental, were you able to sort of just book your own shows and kind of be left alone with that aspect, or were they kind of down your throat about the creative aspect of what you were doing?
No, they at that time we just did we booked our shows and TVs as we saw fit. Cornette and Danny did down there, and I did up here. So yeah, and then sent the finished product to them. Now. They obviously would send people down. They would make suggestions, but nothing was hard and fast. We were allowed to run our, but it was, some of it was just silly. Maven, the first Tough Enough winner, nice, really, really nice young man. And after he won the thing, he was sent to me. And now everybody, that came to our little shows knew who Maven was. But Maven wasn't ready to be on top. Maven had been training 8 weeks.
Yeah.
I had 25 guys better than Maven. Period. End of story. And I was booking my shows to try to draw, and to put the people that earned the top slot are the people that got the top slot. And plus, as Cornette is verbalized in so many occasions, there were times that they would call this guy out from under you at a moment's notice. So even if I were featuring him, they may create problems for me in terms of having him booked in some big hot story and then don't have him because they decide they need him at Raw tonight, So he was where I thought he needed to be, and he was learning. And but you hear, they wonder why you don't have Maven on top. Well, I don't have Maven on top because that's not where he belongs. I allowed some of the guys training with me to help with booking. Some people thought that was wrong, but to me, developmental means developing. And the more you understand about what you're doing in the ring, I think the better you do it. And so I thought, some of the guys appreciated that.
But yeah, one of the guys that is currently sort of one of the great things on WWE TV at the moment, the Shield in full, the group, the Shield, and Dean Ambrose, you know him quite well. You had a hand in helping him along the way. What was your experience with John Moxley, and tell us a little bit about your experiences with him?
Well, John is a good hand. I'm happy to see him get the break. I've watched him from the beginning. He was part of a tag team. I forget what name they called him, but they wore football gear. They were like two college football players or something like that. I forget what they were called. That's the first time I saw him. And the other guy, the guy was his partner. Then I think disappeared, got out. But anyway, I saw the potential in John, and started working with him more to refine him. He started with a guy who I trained, and but I was more on the refining end. I got him his first dark match, I'm happy to see him doing well. But he's a natural talent. I mean, and the other thing was, here was you can tell a lot too. I went over before the people I had sold HWA to when Moxley was during the time that I got him his first dark match. I would go over there one night a week to work with some of their people, and a lot of their main eventers, I guess you would say, or their top guys, didn't show up for whatever reason. But John was always there. John was there. He wanted to learn, and that's, to me, that's that's the important thing. It's you obviously want everybody to be great if they can, but to me, if you're willing to work hard and you give me everything you got, and I can see that you're dedicated and you're trying your best, then I'm going to help every way I can. But if you're an egomaniac and have a lot of talent, then I don't have a minute's time for you. That's just not good. You should never stop learning this business. That's the other thing. You always can strive to be better. Always strive to improve. The three of them are what the young males don't like in Cena, right? They're rebels. They kick butt. They've got rock star looks. I can see all three of them being baby faces at some point in time and drawing really well with that.
Well, you brought his name up, so let's kind of just have a quick couple of thoughts on him. John Cena is a guy that polarizes wrestling more than anybody I can even remember. What do you think of, because obviously there was a point where people started to boo him, and then WWE just sort of were determined that they were going to make him the top babyface. They've had him do everything possible. They've had him beat The Rock and all this different sort of stuff. Do you think that having this sort of back and forth, let's go Cena, Cena sucks, is it a good thing to have?
I don't, I guess they feel they're doing what they can with it, and I don't see that they're going to change it. John was in OVW when I was with the company, and I really liked John. John did some great promos down there that better than what and here again, realize too, a lot of the words that come out of his mouth aren't necessarily his, and his promos are just, I don't know, goofy at some, or just sophomoric, I guess is the best way to put it. But John is not technically a great wrestler, but he's starting, and watching him and Sandow on Monday, I was sitting here thinking, he's starting to learn timing, pacing, listening to the crowd. They had a solid match that wasn't, they weren't on their feet moving 100 miles an hour, but they had the crowd. It was a match that meant something, and Cena was better at it than he's ever been. But that's he's never going to be a great worker. He is never. I mean, he's just not. And that's not a knock. There's a lot of guys that made a lot of money in this business that aren't great workers. One of the smartest workers in this business is The Undertaker. Taker is not technically a great worker either, but Mark over the years has learned pacing, timing. He disguises his weak points and features his strong suits. He understands psychology, he understands how to tell a story, and he milks it for everything he can. And he's Lord knows he's proved over and over again that he can still get a crowd on its feet, even as limited physically as he's been these last couple of years.
Indeed. And Les, the last couple of things I wanted to ask you was, obviously you mentioned the Cena Sandow match on Monday, which was really, really good, and I just kind of wanted to get your take, because elsewhere in this show, my co-host and I will probably be talking about Daniel Bryan and the fallout from Hell in a Cell. Do you think that Daniel Bryan is going to become a sort of top guy in WWE, or do you think that that's not where they see him being, and that they kind of want him to be a kind of upper mid-level card guy?
I think he's got a lot of good sympathy heat. I'm not sure that's, but short of what he did, to Sean on Monday, he's pretty much been the whipping boy. I think he's out. I think now it comes down to Hunter and Big Show, and I thought the moment Big Show drove the truck in, last week, that, okay, Bryan's on his way. And when I say out, I'm looking for him and Punk maybe to work a tag match with the Country Boys.
The Wyatts,
I don't know. Maybe, I don't know. But I think they missed the boat the night that Bryan beat Cena. If they'd had the celebration like they had for Benoit and Guerrero,
mm-hmm.
and got him over, and then started building from there to take it away from him, and they would have left him with more. Now he's not dead, but he's nowhere near what he could have been if they'd have gotten him over 2 months ago.
Les, thank you so much. It's been an absolute pleasure, and I hope you enjoy the rest of your day.
All right, thanks a lot, Kenny. Take care now.
Take care. Bye.
All right, bye-bye.